In the last video, we covered the GTD system architecture map, which, just as a reminder, consists of the systems that we use horizontally here, the habits that we use vertically here, and then the buckets in green. Now, I told you in the last video that we'd be talking about that process of moving items out of your inbox and into your organizational system. So I'm going to move to the document that's specific to this process. Okay, so this is the GTD decision tree, and it's what you use to move stuff out of your inbox and into one of your organizational systems. Now, to understand this decision tree, you'll see that here in green, just like in the last map, the green represents your 8 buckets. And then there's a decision tree that helps you branch and store items in the appropriate bucket. Okay, so let's cover the system. Now, the first item here, of course, is stuff. Stuff gets moved into your inbox, and then for each item in your inbox, you need to ask yourself the question, what is it? Now, what is it is about clarifying the obligation to yourself. Is it something that I feel obligated to organize because I need to either refer to it in the future or do something about it? The next question is it actionable? And of course you can say yes or no. If you say no, it's a relatively simple process, which is you could either A, throw it away, B, store it on a to-do list called someday maybe, which is it is actionable but not right now, so I'm going to store it on a someday maybe list so that I can review it in the future to determine when it will become actionable. The next place you can store something is as reference material. Now, if it's a file, you'd store it in your files, right, in an A to Z file system. If it's an agenda, you would add it to your agenda for a specific person. If it's associated with a list, maybe it's a restaurant that you want to try in St. Louis, you'd add it to your St. Louis restaurants list. And if it's project support material, then you would store it with the notes associated with that particular project. Now, if the answer is yes to is it actionable, you have another question to ask yourself, which is what is the next physical action I need to take in order to make progress on this obligation? Now, if the item that you've recognized is associated with a project, it may move into the project planning loop, which just is a fancy way of saying that you think about a project, you write items down for the project, and you create a project plan. And then that project plan can have action items associated with it, which you recognize as your next action. Once you've recognized what your next action is, there's a question here. Will it take less than 2 minutes? If the answer is yes, you ought to do it. And the reason you ought to do it is because 2 minutes is a short enough period of time for you to do the action item and not have to put it on your organizational system. It saves you time in the long run because it takes about 2 minutes to put an item into your organizational system. Now, if the answer is no, it will not take less than 2 minutes, then you can either delegate or defer the item. If you delegate the item, what that means is you put it on a waiting on list. So if you give somebody else a project to work on, you need to make a note of that in your system so that you can follow up. If you choose to do the item yourself, you're inherently deferring it because you're not doing it right now, which means you're either going to put it on the calendar as a meeting item or a day-specific next action. If you don't put it on your calendar, then you put it on your next actions list. And your next action list is where you house all those to-do items that you want to do as soon as possible. That represents the entirety of the GTD decision tree. And again, just to reiterate, if I go back to my GTD system architecture map, the GTD decision tree sits right here between your inbox and your organizational system, right, those buckets. And it's the decision-making process you use to get the item out of your inbox and into one of these green buckets. So what we'll do in the next video is we'll actually cover a real GTD system where I'll walk through the processes that we've identified using Evernote, OneNote, and the other organizational systems that I use for my own personal GTD system.